It is Saturday, February 17th, 2018, and this is Seahawks Chats with Kenneth Arthur, the show, if you like, where myself, Kenneth Arthur, I bring in someone to talk about the Seahawks or the NFL in general. You may have also heard me do Seaside Chats, where I talk to a celebrity about their favorite NFL team, and you may know about 3000 NFL mock draft, where myself and Rob Staten talk about the draft and the NFL at large. And those podcasts also came right here in the same feed, which is Seaside Chats on iTunes. If you want to subscribe to that on iTunes, it's Seaside Chats with Kenneth Arthur. And, with all of these podcasts as well, I make them from my laptop. I book the guests and I upload them to SoundCloud, which costs a fee. And, there's many hours that go into these podcasts. So if you like them a little bit, I would ask you to kindly go over to patreon.com/field goals. Field goals, I should say. Man, this name was not chosen by me or Danny Kelly, but it does exist. Go to patreon.com/field goals. Even $1 or $2, something that, gives me a little bit of assistance to keep the shows going that, where we cover the Seahawks or the draft or the NFL. So I can, keep bringing in these great guests to talk about football. So if you want to donate anything to the Patreon, I would really appreciate it. That's patreon.com/field goals. And then in the era of everybody crowdfunding or, crowdsourcing their medical bills and their way of living and they're living to make a living wage, I don't necessarily feel bad about letting you know about our Patreon. So please check that out. And of course, if even for free, we're happy to have you as a listener. Very much so. And especially this week, if you are a fan of Real in the Field Goals, the original podcast with myself and Danny Kelly, then guess what? It is back this week as Danny Kelly, former managing editor of Field Goals and now a full-time NFL writer at The Ringer. Danny, welcome back.
Thank you. I love the Real in the Field Goals name. I just thought that was like such a fun name to have. I don't know. And I love the intro song that we had. Do you guys still do you have a new one for the new podcast yet?
I don't have one. I never
get that.
There's a lot of things that I should be doing, and in terms of like upgrading updating the picture, the image on the iTunes, which is still Real in the Field Goals. Putting in a intro song, which hasn't happened, and maybe I could have never changed the name to begin with. Again, patreon.com/field goals. Remember, this is all done for $0, $1 an hour. So we're doing our best, or by we I mean me. And that's what's going on here at the podcast. But
good summation. This is a labor of love. What are you saying?
Oh, for sure, it has to be. The love is the payment. And
I don't know if you've seen the football industry of late, but yes, it's very much a labor of love.
Indeed it is. But it is not, and I do love talking to great football people about football, or just my friends. And Danny, you qualify as both of those. And I don't remember exactly how long it's been since the last time you were on the show. Probably a few months, I would imagine.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, so we have a lot to catch up on and some things, and we'll try and zoom through that in this episode, where we'll go over the Seahawks and we'll go over the Eagles and some of the stuff that went on last season and the current offseason. And we'll talk about the free agents for Seattle and get the marks on whether or not you should sign or not re-sign these players, and we'll talk about the draft. So let's just open it up to the 2017 season in general. Danny, obviously the Philadelphia Eagles have become the Super Bowl world champions, beating the New England Patriots. Those two teams got to the Super Bowl by beating the Jacksonville Jaguars and the Minnesota Vikings. Some surprising participants, perhaps in the conference championships, especially on the quarterbacks front. So with that being said, what are your feelings on the Philadelphia Eagles as the world champions? Did it with Nick Foles, kind of an underdog story, certainly an underdog story, and they wore that with pride, quite literally. So with the Philadelphia Eagles, do you see them as a reigning champion that is bound to come down to earth, or at least to get a little bit worse maybe next year? Because, as teams usually do, if you're if you get to that height, maybe you do take a step back? Or do you see them getting better because they didn't finish the season with Carson Wentz, who, himself is just going to be going into his third season and could be improving, though they don't know and nobody knows if he'll be ready for the start of the season, or, staying about the same? Where do you see the Eagles heading into next year?
Yeah, that's tough. I mean, obviously the quarterback question is the big thing, and who is going to be the quarterback next year and what they're going to do with Nick Foles. And kind of wrote about that a couple of weeks ago. It's like, on one hand, you want to capitalize on probably what Nick Foles, like he's never going to have a higher value probably than right now, unless he is actually, sort of what he was in 2013 and like this amazing, ridiculous 119 passer rating type passer. Like he looked like that in the playoffs. He was really, really good in the playoffs. But I guess the question is that sort of, repeatable, and is that really who he is? I don't know. We'll see. But right now he's got a lot of trade value. And so if they could get like a first round pick or a second and a player or something like that, they have to probably think about it. But at the same time, is Wentz going to be back? We don't have any guarantee of that. And it's kind of pushing up against, the recovery time. I think it's going to push into training camp, obviously and potentially into the preseason. And if he has any setbacks, I mean, obviously he could miss games in the regular season. So that would be, a crucial decision that we're going to have to watch this year. And I guess I kind of lean towards them keeping Foles as long as he doesn't want to force a trade, which I guess he could. But yeah, I think they have the potential to be really good again. They do have some really key free agents, to kind of figure out. Nigel Bradham, their linebacker, is a free agent. Patrick Robinson, who came in this year and was really, really good nickelback for them, is a free agent. And so there's some questions, but overall, I mean, they are kind of reminiscent of the Seahawks from a few years ago. So like they look set up for longer term success. I mean, yeah. They're very deep at some key positions. They're getting Sidney Jones back next year, which could probably give them a boost in the corners at the cornerback spot. Their defensive line is stacked, but they, at the same time, they don't have a ton of draft capital. I mean, they spent a lot of it go up and get Wentz, and I think that's still happening. I mean, it's still like I think they lose one pick this year for that, and then they also gave up a pick to get Ronald Darby. So there's, they don't have a ton of draft capital. So it's, I think they're set up, but they face the same challenges that a lot of teams do. And, they obviously kind of had this, they caught, lightning in a bottle in the whole Foles thing in the playoffs, because I just don't know if that's repeatable again. It's just one of those things. So
with the Nick Foles trade situation or whatever, and thinking that maybe it would only happen if you forced them, I've kind of been holding the opinion that, that you can't do more than, like win one Super Bowl with Nick Foles. And maybe this is the best, most opportune time to try and trade him and get some of that draft capital back. And regardless of the fact that if it hurts them a little bit with having a backup situation that they need to address next year, and maybe even considering that Foles, maybe there is better yet to come. But he was also a player that struggled a bit at the end of the season, and had struggled in opportunities to start for the Eagles and the Rams. And if they could get do you think it would require, if you were in charge of the Eagles, would it require a certain get back of a first round, or 2 second rounds, or would it just be you don't want to do it?
Oh man, that's tough, because there's a couple arguments you can make. Obviously, on one hand, you could say, well, Doug Peterson, he's so good as a play designer and a play caller, and they're so smart with how they set up their offense to accentuate the skill sets of their quarterbacks, that he could do that with another mid-tier veteran. They could go out and sign Josh McCown or something, in case Wentz is sort of slow to in his development now. And that's assuming that McCown is not going to be a starter somewhere, but like a Matt Moore, Derek Anderson, one of these older vets that are free agents right now. You could go replace Foles in theory with one of those guys and kind of run the offense. On the other hand, Foles did have that 2013 season. So it's like, man, are you giving away a guy who has whatever top 10 potential as a quarterback in the right situation, in the right system, and maybe that's what they found. So I would say the starting point would at least be a second rounder. and then go from there. Um, I don't know. I'm actually going to look up while we're talking here what they have in terms of their draft capital, but I would say, yeah, I mean, like start
Well,
with
the
a second
Eagles,
rounder.
yeah, they have the 32nd overall pick, of course. They don't have their second round pick because that was traded in the Carson Wentz deal
Mm-hmm.
to the Browns. So the Browns have their second round pick, giving the Browns, 6 picks or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 picks in the top 65.
They don't have a
Uh,
third rounder either. So the
and
Eagles have a first, and then they don't pick again until the fourth round.
yeah, well, yeah, you're
So
right. So, yeah, that's one of the other reasons. Plus, saving $7 million off the cap or whatever it
mhm.
would be. They are currently, I think, 9 million over the cap for next season. So, even though they're not
Oh, are
spending a
they?
lot on the
Wow.
quarterback position in general, because Carson Wentz is on a rookie deal, they seemingly need to save money somewhere.
Yeah, they're the only team, according to Over the Cap, they're the only team that's over the cap right now. That's
Yeah.
crazy.
Well, then
So
that's when you go to overthecap.com. It should just be a picture of the Eagles if they're going to be true to their website's name.
yeah, good branding. So yeah, I don't know. I think it's a really tough decision. I kind of waffle on what they should do. Honestly, part of me thinks that yeah, you capitalize right now. You build for the long term. It's kind of like the whole win forever argument. Like you can't have draft classes that don't get you anything. Like we've seen with the Seahawks lately. Like a couple bad draft classes has really affected their ability to like compete.
Yeah.
And so you can't afford to have these like bad draft classes. And like one of the main reasons they did so well this year is because they did, such a good job in free agency and the sort of that like mid-tier free agency. And, like you said, if they, can get a starter for that money instead of a guy that's potentially going to be a backup the whole year, I think that certainly makes some sense. So it's a tough decision. I don't know what the best choice is. And it's going to be it'll be a defining sort of situation going into the offseason, because if Nick Foles becomes available, that's sort of a domino that you throw out there that kind of, could throw a wrench in like a lot of teams' plans.
Yeah. So with that, and you've mentioned, and we've talked about Nick Foles, and we're talking about the NFC East or the NFC and the Eagles, and whether or not they can, repeat. And we haven't even had a team win the NFC East 2 years in a row since 2004. So it's been hard for any team to have any consistency in that division. And Washington went 7-9 last year. They require Alex Smith, which gives Kirk Cousins an opportunity to get into free agency, and he could go to, any number of teams and change the outlook of that franchise. And it seems like there's a lot of quarterbacks that'll be moving around this year of note, more than perhaps any year of recent memory that I can think of, in terms of Nick Foles and Kirk Cousins. And we've already seen Alex Smith and Case Keenum and Sam Bradford, and there's so many. With that being said, like, first of all, do you see? Because I was interested to see Doug Farrar say on Twitter yesterday that actually Alex Smith is a significant upgrade over Kirk Cousins. Do you see that same thing? And where do you see Kirk Cousins sort of using his free agency to what would be the best thing to his advantage?
Well, I don't think. I mean, I don't know. I guess and I really respect Doug's opinion. Is he basing that on kind of what Alex Smith was this year? Because I think if you take just the Alex Smith from this season and assume that he can do what he did this season in Washington, then I probably agree with him that that Alex Smith was really, really good this year is the bottom line. My concern is that was sort of an outlier for the rest of his career. I mean, like, he's always been very efficient, but he's not, he's not an aggressive thrower. He's always been sort of known as a check down guy. He's very reticent to push the ball downfield. And that's always been who he was until this year, when he suddenly became the best deep ball passer in the NFL all of a sudden, like after, 10 plus years in the NFL or whatever, how many seasons he's been here. But so to me, that worries me, because it seems like the Chiefs kind of put together this perfect offense to like suit his skill set, with, Travis Kelce running down the seam, and then Tyreek Hill, probably the fastest guy in the NFL, threatening defenses down the sideline. You don't really have that sort of set of weapons in Washington, and it's going to be a new play caller and a new coach. And there's just a lot of variables. So I personally see, I think Cousins is I just think he's better than Smith in terms of his aggressiveness throwing downfield and just the things he can do. And he's also younger. So I personally didn't think it was, necessarily the greatest decision for the Redskins to do that. But at the same time, they'd kind of poisoned the well already. So it's kind of like a sunk cost at this point. Like they weren't going to re-sign Cousins in my mind. He wasn't going to want to go back there. Why on earth would he go back there? Like, you know what I mean? Like they could offer him any amount of money. I'd be like, I think I'm going to go to a situation where
I forget. Was Scott McLuhan? Was the rumor that Scott McLuhan didn't want Kirk Cousins? He didn't want to re-sign Kirk Cousins, right?
Right. Yeah. He's actually gone on record a couple times after saying that he didn't see special with Cousins, and he didn't want to, give him this contract that would essentially, make him into like top whatever quarterback. And you have to put he basically said you have to put a bunch of weapons around him. You have to have him in a really good situation. Yeah. That's what he saw. But there were rumors or whatever that reports that they did offer him contracts, and Cousins just said no. So it's a little bit of both.
I don't think they get rid of the GM and then they lose the quarterback anyway. But I mean, I guess they got the quarterback that they want. I mean, you certainly, based on any number of factors, and the reason that Alex Smith was the number one pick, there's certain physical things that he does that are that just Kirk Cousins can never have, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, I think he's probably more mobile, and I mean, like Smith is one of those underrated guys that in terms of his ability to run the ball, a scramble, and so things like that. So he could add a dimension in that sense. So I don't know. It'll be interesting to see if the Redskins change their offense to make it look a little bit more like what the Chiefs ran this year with a lot of the RPOs and because Smith came from a spread system, so it's kind of like he finally found a system that really seemed to like fit what he's best at, and that's like what made him a first overall pick. So. That'll be interesting. I think the Cousins domino is going to be the biggest storyline of the season, just like where he ends up. I think my ideal scenario would be to see him, well, not ideal or whatever, it's not my opinion necessarily, but I think his ideal scenario would be this
is for Danny, by the way. This is for Danny's benefit.
Kirk, please go to the Jaguars because I think that would be fun. I just don't want to see Bortles in Jacksonville anymore. I think it seems like he's probably going to be there, but I just think he hamstrings so much what they're wanting to do, and that defense is so amazing. That could turn them into, I mean, they already were a Super Bowl contender. I mean, they made it to the championship game and damn near won. And so, yeah, I mean, it would make them, to me, one of the top Super Bowl contenders, and I just think it would be fun. And I don't know. I just think it would be fun to see him in that system. I think secondary to that, I would say Minnesota, but Keenum probably end up being back in Minnesota. But I could see Cousins entertaining the thought of going to the Vikings just because they've got a really good defense. They've got tons of weapons. They have they have two essentially number one receivers in Thielen and Diggs, and so he'd be set up for success really well there.
Yeah, and I wonder. With the Jaguars, I almost wonder because they are at 16 million right now, 16.9 million in cap room. They can sign. I think they can save 7 million by cutting Hearns. They can't get rid of Bortles if he doesn't pass his physical, and that's 19 million that they're already committed to the quarterback position. We did see, I think it was the Minnesota Vikings. Who was it? It was the Miami Dolphins, had committed the most money to quarterback last year because they had Tannehill and Cutler. And it's like a thing that teams have to do sometimes, for sure. But I also wonder, because the Jaguars defense is so good and because Blake Bortles, was so detrimental perhaps to that offense, that there has to be, it could almost be that they could go out and just get a Bradford, or they could just get a minor upgrade and probably compete for the Super Bowl as well, right?
Yeah, and I mean, that's the other thing is there's actually quite a few quarterbacks. I think that would probably be a lot better than Bortles to give them a chance to, kind of go back to the AFC Championship and contend for the Super Bowl. So, yeah, I mean, it doesn't have to be Cousins. That's just kind of like a perfect world. But, yeah, I mean, it all kind of depends on whether Bortles can pass that physical. And I think they've already said that they're planning on running with Bortles. And, we'll see. Like, obviously, teams say a lot of stuff, so who knows what that means. But
yeah,
Yeah, no, that Bortles situation can be interesting because there were times last year where he looked really good. Showed up against the Seahawks and made some really good passes, obviously. But I mean, God, there were times when he looked like, I mean, legitimately like he didn't know how to throw a football. And he's actually talked about how, I think he's even said or admitted on the record, like he's not a natural thrower of the football. Like you can really see that when you watch him throw. It's like it looks like he's thinking about, here's how I'm supposed to like throw a football. You know what I mean? It's really awkward and off balance. If he doesn't have a perfect pocket to like step up and like, make a step up and throw in rhythm, like you're just playing catch with your friend. If he doesn't have that, it all falls apart and he ends up like jump throwing and doing, it's just really, really terrible looking and obviously not very accurate. So yeah,
I mean, it's certainly interesting in the way that the Jaguars have approached their team building, because they did use all of that cap space and like good draft picks to build a great defense. One of the best defenses probably the last few years. I think there was still a step above that they could go that certainly didn't put them in the same territory, I think, as the Seahawks and of like 2013 era and the Broncos of like 2015. The Football Outsiders, the DVOA, kind of pushes that forward as well and kind of backs that up. And it's interesting. I mean, as much as you can, some people can support like the Leonard Fournette pick as picking a good running back. There were quarterbacks there too, where it's like, if you had a Deshaun Watson, even if you had a Patrick Mahomes, who, there were opportunities there to have quarterbacks that you could build around, that just would give you as much of an opportunity, but be younger and cheaper.
Yeah.
And now they've almost, and they pushed themselves too far back in the draft now to do that. But, like I was saying, there are quarterbacks out there available, even at the second tier level, that'll be, interesting to see, move around and change places. And, what are your thoughts on the whole AJ McCarron situation and how much he'll actually be valued at?
I don't know. That's a good question. I think he's going to end up in Cleveland with Hugh. Seems like the perfect sort of situation for him. He'll be there. He'll get a chance for like a year or two, probably, to be the starter. And, depending on who the Browns end up taking, if they take a quarterback, they better take a quarterback if they have the first and fourth pick in, what could be the best quarterback class, in the last 20 years or whatever. But we'll see. This is the Browns, so who knows? But yeah, I mean, it kind of makes sense for them to, he comes in, he's been with Hugh before. They know each other. He's got there's a lot of like a knowledge base there. Like he knows that guy and it's vice versa. So just makes sense that he would try and go to that situation, and then be a bridge for the future. And that way he could kind of pay, he could prove that he's a starter if he is a starter or not. So going back to 2015, I mean, he was pretty good. Like he played well when he came in for Dalton, but at the same time, that was a team. Again, it was like they were set up they were perfectly calibrated to have a quarterback success. It was they had AJ Green, they had Mohamed Sanu, they had Marvin Jones. All three of those guys have proven to be pretty good. Like Jones is arguably number one, and Sanu is a really good 2. And so they had 3 really, really good receivers. They had Tyler Eifert, who was just a beast that year. They had, Jeremy Hill and Giovanni Bernard. They had a really good pass blocking offensive line. It was perfectly set up for him to succeed. And so when you throw him into a situation, it's kind of like what I was talking about Bortles. Like when he has a harder situation, like what is he going to look like? We don't really know. I'm assuming not nearly as good, but Glennon got a $35 million or whatever contract. So he's going to get paid. He's probably going to be paid somewhere in the teens in terms of millions per year, like 15 or 17 or something like that. I've seen people throwing numbers out. It wouldn't surprise me at all if he gets that.
So with the NFC West, obviously this is a Seahawks focused podcast, and we can get into the Seahawks competition at the other three teams in the NFC West, we've got the 49ers who signed Jimmy Garoppolo to the big deal and won their last 5 games, and the LA Rams who won the division, and then the Cardinals. And starting with the Cardinals, because a lot of people see them as the 4th place team in the NFC West, regardless of what they do. One of the interesting things that I sort of realized in doing sort of an article the other day. I didn't sort of do the article. I did the article, and I can stand by that. You can disagree with the article, but certainly I wrote it, and that's undeniable. So with the article on the Cardinals, it was like, yeah, this is a team that doesn't have a quarterback, and their head coach is retired, and they're going under a lot of transition, but it was still a defense that ranked 4th in DVOA and 1st against the run. And, has players that are going to be returning. And it's not like they're coming back with a team that, they were 8-8. So it's like with the Cardinals, they could potentially, they have 22 million in cap space, but I think they can get to at least 32 million by cutting some dead weight. And that's enough money to maybe go after a Kirk Cousins, and certainly to maybe go after a Case Keenum or something along those lines. So with that being said, where do you really see the Cardinals at right now, and how they could get better, and would they be able to get back to the playoffs next season?
I mean, so there's a couple of things with the Cardinals, and I think, they do have very good players on defense. But it'll be interesting to see kind of how that changes with, they're getting a new defensive coordinator, a new head coach, and a new system, probably. I mean, like, I don't know. I'm sure Wilkes and his staff will probably try and use some of the things that the Cardinals did well last year and kind of, adapt that to his scheme. But I mean, the Panthers run, sort of a 4-3, and they've been running a 3-4, different styles. Obviously the 4-3 and the 3-4 thing don't matter as much anymore because of the amount that teams play sub packages. But I mean, it's still a different gap principles, different style. So it'll be interesting to see how that changes things if they can continue to be so good this year. They've got some free agents they got to take care of. The cornerback position is still sort of a nightmare across from Patrick Peterson. They don't have an answer there, and they've got a couple of their linebackers are free agents. So they got some stuff to take care of. On the offensive side of the ball, there's obviously way more, huge question marks. Obviously, it's good that Larry's coming back, Larry Fitzgerald, but John Brown, Jaron Brown are both free agents. They don't really have like a top tier tight end. And then they've got question marks on offensive line. Their offensive line's just not been good, and they've been injured. And now they've got free agents coming up. Alex Boone's a free agent, or a Watford. And so if you're a quarterback, I guess, especially Cousins, I just can't see Cousins wanting to go to Arizona because there's just so much uncertainty right there. Now it could happen, just, maybe he knows the guys in Arizona or something. There's like a relationship there. But if you look at the roster, I don't know. It just doesn't seem to me like an ideal situation for him with a shaky offensive line, not much in the way of weapons on offense outside of David Johnson. Obviously, Larry Fitzgerald's great, but that's not a long-term thing,
They have 2 weapons right now, basically, and that's it.
So I don't know. That to me is, if I'm a quarterback, I'm looking at that new new coaching staff, tons of questions on offense. Is that really where you want to go? I wouldn't if I were him, but again, this is money talks, and potentially if they can offer him more money guaranteed or whatever, then that could eliminate sort of all these arguments. But to me, that wouldn't be my first choice, even though in theory they do have a good defense kind of set up to help support him. But yeah, I mean, I just, that wouldn't be my first choice.
So the 49ers, have sort of remembered what it's like for the 49ers fans to feel good again. Like how vicious things can get online if you said anything slightly distracting against their 5-0 record to finish the season, or Jimmy Garoppolo. But that being said, I'm not going to stop pointing out the obvious and the things that are important to point out, regardless if I was biased for or against any team. I'm still looking at a team in the 49ers that, their 5-game winning streak, the Rams game in week 17 doesn't count because the Rams sat everybody. I would be impressed with their 44-33 win over the Jaguars. So certainly that's something to keep in mind. The Titans, they beat 25-23. They beat the Texans, who maybe were the worst team in the NFL in the second half of the year, even worse than the Browns. And then the Bears, they beat by a single point, and that's with Mitchell Trubisky and everything. And I think that's just only to say the fact that the 49ers were not as bad as their 1-10 record, maybe, and not as good as their 5-0 finish. So maybe the 49ers settle into just being a team that's somewhere in the middle. And I think a repeat of their 6-10 record over the course of a full season is not only perfectly reasonable, but also, if I'm a 49ers fan, perfectly acceptable, because
right. I mean,
if they came back next year and went 6-10 or 7-9 as a 49ers fan, I think you have to say that's an improvement. Even if they went 5-0, even if they went 6-10, I would still say that's an improvement, because you look at the roster right now, they've got Jimmy Garoppolo locked in, which is, it's good for them. He may turn out to be great.
Right.
I think, he was fine to end the year. And, it's just hard to criticize anyone who went 5-0, because we do put so much judgment in quarterback wins, whether you agree with it or don't disagree with or disagree with it. It's how we've judged quarterbacks forever. So, I understand that, but they have issues, I think, with their talent. And when you look at the roster up and down, there's just not a lot of talent. They've got a lot of holes to fill. And their second round pick they used on Jimmy Garoppolo, and it's going to be a pretty good pick. So with all that being said, where do you see the 49ers right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think, well, I'll put it this way. I like Jimmy Garoppolo. I think he's good, and I think he could be really good for them. But again, like you said, I mean, it's a small sample size, so we don't really know. I don't know. Their defense they've got some guys on the defense that are very interesting. Obviously, their front line, guys like DeForest Buckner and Solomon Thomas, and there's some interesting talent there. But with the Reuben Foster kind of question marks going forward, I do think their defense still lacks talent. They've got a couple. Eric Reed is a free agent. I don't think they've got real answers at the cornerback spots yet. So I mean, it's not like they're like set up to make a run at a championship necessarily from a talent perspective at this point. I think, like you said, they're on the right path, and I think there's definitely reason to be optimistic for what Shanahan can do in a second year with that offense. I think their offense is a little bit scarier right now than their defense, because when you get Pierre Garçon back, like Marquise Goodwin kind of showed he's a really underrated receiver last year, kind of came into his own. I think they've got some other interesting weapons on offense, and then they've got $74 million in cap space, so they can go out and get a guy like Allen Robinson or whoever, and they could be really pretty stacked on offense, and we could see, a pretty damn good offense, I bet, next year. Now, the question is, like, how good does it have to be to kind of make up for what looks like the defense still has a lot of work to do? So, long story short, I do think that they are on the uptick. They are going in the right direction, and I think that they're going to be a challenging team next year. But I don't necessarily know if they're a playoff team at this point yet, or certainly not. I wouldn't vote them into like the Super Bowl contenders sort of range at any point yet. But I probably wouldn't have said that about the Jags at this point last year either. So you just never really know. It's one of those things that's always fun about football. But to me, the talent level on defense is concerning.
Yeah.
And we still really don't know what Jimmy Garoppolo gives you. I think based on what we do know already, like, he looks pretty damn good, though. So it's just one of those things that we'll have to see how it plays out.
Yeah. And we don't know. A lot of it will be, especially with the Seahawks, I feel like we're closer to being able to know what team they're going to bring next year. And with the 49ers, because of their cap space, who knows how big. They've already spent $37 million on Garoppolo, for next season. So even after that,
crazy. They still have $74
million. And they can upgrade with Allen Robinson. They could use their number 9 pick on Quentin Nelson, or I don't know, exactly what their target would be. And with that, they could get better in ways that make us go, oh yeah, okay, well let's take this under consideration. But even we'll just see how much time it takes to gel. I don't necessarily see them riding that 5-game winning streak into an 11-5 record next season. But we'll see how much more they change.
I really like Shanahan. I that's the thing is, to me, the Shanahan thing is kind of a wild card. I really like what he does on offense. We saw teams do really well this year because they had really smart, savvy, good game planning offensive coordinators, and I think Shanahan is really good. So I think their offense is going to be really good. I'll put it that way. And the rest of it, I don't know. And like, how good does it have to be to make them a contender? That's a question. But I do think their offense is going to be pretty good.
Yeah, do you remember this? The the LA Rams played the San Francisco 49ers in week 3. The Rams,
that game was fun as hell.
Led the
was
game.
That Thursday night?
Yes. And so the Rams, they led the game 17-7. They led the game 27-13. They led the game 34-20. They led the game 41-26. And the 49ers came back to make it 41-39, and a 2-point conversion failed that would have tied the game. And if you would have seen that then and seen it at the end of the season where they were going, that the Rams would win the division and the 49ers would start 1-10. That was a Brian Hoyer-led 49ers.
I was going to ask, who was even playing quarterback at that point?
Yeah, that was a Brian Hoyer-led team that almost beat the Rams. And the 49ers, so the 49ers had some fight in them, but at the same time, the Rams, at times last season looked kind of awful. And I think it was really hard to judge the Rams. On one hand, they beat the Giants 51-17. They beat the Seahawks 42-7. And on the other hand, they had those games that they didn't look very good, including in the playoffs. So what were your thoughts on Sean McVay, Jared Goff, Todd Gurley, those key players, and the status of Aaron Donald?
Well, number one, they're going to get Aaron Donald done. I can't see them not doing that. It would make absolutely no sense. And nothing that they've done so far has been really, I guess, stupid. So I can't see them doing that. I've been really impressed with McVay. I think that when you look at, they literally, I think, had the best offensive turnaround of any team in NFL history. And that says a lot about, like I was just saying, about like scheming and playing to your team's strengths. And obviously he made some good decisions. That he and the front office made some good decisions on the free agents to bring in. Obviously, I think having Andrew Whitworth on the blind side was huge. Helped them in a lot of areas. And then, obviously bringing in Robert Woods and drafting Cooper Kupp and even Sammy Watkins, who he ended up, kind of being disappointing, but I think he had 7 or 8 touchdowns, or maybe more.
He had 8 touchdowns. Yeah.
8 touchdowns. So yeah, I mean, like, they made some really good decisions in free agency, and their offense took an enormous jump. I don't think anyone really expected Jared Goff to actually be this good after what we saw last year. Like, he was legitimately terrible, like atrocious as a rookie. And so, I mean, I think you have to give a ton of credit to what McVay was able to do on offense, and just like the ability for them to change the culture there. Todd Gurley again looks like like an MVP type candidate. McVay made him a huge part of their passing game, and I think that really unlocked a lot for him. So I really was impressed with the Rams. I do think you're right, though. They were kind of, at times inconsistent. They bulldozed teams at times, and then at other times they looked, pretty beatable. And so kind of an interesting team. I think their defense is good. And going back to that, like, this was the Rams had one of the best offenses in the NFL, if not the best. They were top scoring offense in the NFL. And they had a really good defense too. And so, like, that was my thing, is how far can the Niners get with just a really good offense? I don't know. So that's kind of the question for me. I think the Rams are really balanced compared to other teams, especially the 49ers. But yeah, I mean, it's different every year. There's some teams. There will be some years where really, really unbalanced teams do well. This year, it was the balanced teams that did really well. Like the Vikings were really balanced. Even the Jags, I think you could say, were balanced because they had like a really strong run game and all that. And so, yeah, I mean, it just kind of depends on the year. But I do think the Rams are legit. I don't think it was a weird one-off year. I think, I mean, they've been spending the last 6 or 7 years accumulating talent. Like, at some point, they were going to find a guy who could get the most out of it. Obviously, Jeff Fisher was not that guy. I think McVay proved that, he knows what he's doing. It's crazy that he's like 32.
It's interesting. Also to me is, Jared Goff, with the number 1 scoring offense and 28 touchdowns, 7 interceptions, 8 yards per attempt, a rating of 100.5. All of that being said, his his raw QBR was 48.4, which ranked 20th in the NFL. It was a lower QBR than Tyrod Taylor, who was 12th, than Josh McCown, who was 13th, and Blake Bortles, then was 14th. Marcus Mariota was 15th. Carson Palmer, who was 19th. And whatever you think about QBR, you know, a lot of it came down to, was he making plays that mattered in big moments? And, you know, Jared Goff didn't have those. Either he didn't have the opportunities, or the opportunities that he did have, he didn't capitalize on, because he had one game-winning drive, one fourth quarter comeback on the season. We know that against the Seattle Seahawks, they had that final pass to Cooper Kupp.
Should have caught it, probably. Yeah.
Probably should have been caught, and there's that may have improved his QBR, but you know, it didn't happen. And I don't know what your thoughts are on QBR in general, but I do think it's interesting that, you know, sort of this theory that I think there is about Jared Goff that I hold to be true, which is, you know, because he was so bad as a rookie and then got so much better on the surface, and just watching him play in those games against the Seahawks, he doesn't seem that good to me. He does seem to be benefiting from the place that he's in.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, obviously there's no, he's not a finished product at all. I think for me, yeah, like it's definitely, comparing to his rookie year, he looked infinitely better. I'll put it that way. I wouldn't put him in
or Jared Goff.
I would take Garoppolo pretty quickly, I think. And you know, it's like the kind of, you could ask the same question, you know, like Nick Foles or Jared Goff, like they kind of similar. I think Goff does not, and I don't know how QBR is like officially, you know, how they calculate it or whatever, but I mean, I know that they do factor in running ability.
Well, this one
has none
passing QBR.
What's that?
Well, I just pointed out his passing QBR. It doesn't have the running added into it, so there's different QBR.
Gotcha.
So mine personally didn't have the running into it.
Okay, well that makes sense. Yeah, I mean, so I think there's definitely like question marks still attached to Goff. I'm not saying he's a
for
product
sure,
or even like a top 10 necessarily at this point, but yeah, like his improvement over last year was incredible. So
this is also
feel good about that.
This is also the thing that I'm holding, you know, all year long, is like an opinion that I'll keep putting out there. Not really an opinion. It's just something that I think it's interesting, and it's the thing to look out for in the NFL this year and for the next 5 years, which is, you know, as you go down the list of NFC teams, you've got Carson Wentz, Dak Prescott, Alex Smith, Eli Manning, and we'll see if the Giants draft a quarterback of the future. The Vikings are there right now with maybe Case Keenum. The line, Matthew Stafford, Aaron Rodgers, Mitchell Trubisky, Drew Brees, Cam Newton, Matt Ryan, Jameis Winston, Jared Goff, Russell Wilson. The Cardinals are the one team that's up in the air, and then Jimmy Garoppolo. You compare that to the AFC, where Tom Brady is going to be 41. Ben Roethlisberger's what, 38 or so. Andrew Luck is injured. Phillip Rivers may be the most talented quarterback in the AFC. The teams that don't have quarterbacks are, most of the teams don't have a quarterback right now to build their team around in the AFC. So if I am a quarterback and I want to get to the Super Bowl, I would think go to the AFC. But in the meantime, it seems to me that the NFC is going to be the conference where the playoffs are going to be more interesting. They're going to be more exciting. You're going to see more battles. We didn't see that this year because of the injuries and the unexpected emergence of the Minnesota Vikings. But man, it seems like the NFC is set up so much better than the AFC.
God, especially if, you know, obviously if Rodgers is healthy all year, that's like a huge factor too. I mean, yeah, so that's interesting. The NFC is pretty stacked at quarterback.
I mean, the weakest spots are Arizona, which, you know, we'll see what happens. They probably will go out and get somebody. The New York Giants, who will likely draft a quarterback, and maybe the Chicago Bears, because we just don't know where they stand. We don't know where Mitchell Trubisky is going to go, but he is still a young guy who, you know, could, like Carson Wentz or Jared Goff, take a huge step forward next season with some new coaching. So it's going to be, you know, it's interesting to see what happens there. And everything else in the AFC, it's like Andrew Luck didn't play all year long. We'll see Deshaun Watson, but he just tore his ACL. Marcus Mariota, huge step back. Blake Bortles, like you said, terrible. The Cleveland Browns, Cincinnati Bengals, Andy Dalton, Joe Flacco, the most overpaid quarterback in the NFL history. the New York Jets, the Miami Dolphins, the Buffalo Bills, the Oakland Raiders, and the Derek Carr, situation with the amount of money they're paying him. The Denver Broncos, Patrick Mahomes is going to be his first time starting. So it's like, and then we'll see the retirement maybe of Tom Brady and Ben Roethlisberger within the next year or two. So it's like, that could be it's a wild west out in the AFC. And in the NFC, it's like every team might have a quarterback.
Yeah. No, wow. That's actually really interesting just looking through the list. It's crazy. And I mean, like the established one, like Dalton, and Dalton is, I guess it's sort of one of the, he's like a litmus test for a lot of people, but he's not that good. And so it's like, yeah, wow, that's crazy. Yeah. I hope that Mariota improves under their new coach and kind of gets back to what he does well, because he's an easy guy to root for. Patrick Mahomes should be a lot of fun. But yeah, I mean, it's like I don't think Tannehill is necessarily that good. Flacco is certainly not good.
Yeah.
I don't know what the Browns are going to do. Roethlisberger's on his last legs. Man, interesting.
Yeah, so it's something to watch for, and we'll transition now into the Seattle Seahawks. Right now, they're 9-7. Cap room with over the cap currently set at 14 million, though certainly some changes are coming there that we can get into a little bit. But they don't have much room to change as is, and it seems like the Seattle Seahawks will, because of their deals for Cam Chancellor and Michael Bennett, they're a little bit stuck with what they have. Though it's still a team with Russell Wilson, it's still a team with Pete Carroll, it's still a team with talent on defense. Do you see them, where they're currently standing? Do you see them making one of these huge changes, like a trading away one of their superstars like Earl Thomas or Richard Sherman, or do you see them sort of standing pat?
I don't think they're going to trade Earl Thomas. I mean, I really hope they don't anyway. I don't think it makes any sense for them to do that. And I just don't really know why they wouldn't just give him a long-term extension. He's not like he's slowed down or gotten any worse. He had probably one of his better seasons this year, and he's sort of still in his prime. So to me, it just doesn't make any sense to trade Earl Thomas. I hope they don't do that. I don't think they're going to be able to trade Richard Sherman. I mean, he's injured, and we don't really even know when he's going to start playing. He's got a big contract. I don't know any team is going to take the risk on that. So I lean towards they're not going to trade any of their major stars. I just, I don't think it. I can't see like a trade scenarios emerging for Richard Sherman where you get enough in return.
Absolutely. I mean, like
because he's not even going to be healthy probably till at least the preseason, right? At least
he's pretty much a bargain, at 13 million. If he does Richard Sherman things, that's a bargain. And I think if anything, it's his cornerback position. Usually there's a good chance that Richard Sherman has 5 to 6 years left. If not, who knows? Charles Woodson played till he was 39. So and you might require a position change at some point. But right now, especially with how difficult it is to find good cornerbacks, you would not. I think we saw what the Seahawks did without him, and I think it was admirable. They did a little bit better maybe than one could have expected, moving on to Byron Maxwell and everything. But yeah, it does seem like that would be most likely for them to just stay with what they've got in terms of that area. But certainly some changes have to come. Cliff Averill and Cam Chancellor, with their neck injuries and uncertainty ahead, do you have any sort of inclination or feelings about those situations?
I wish I did. I wish I had any insight onto what to expect from those two, because I mean, obviously, I guess this wasn't really news, but it's, obviously Chancellor's going to try and play if he can get medically cleared, which is a good sign. He's not just going to retire immediately. I don't know what's going on with Averill. I think it's kind of the same deal. Like, he's going to try and play, but if he can't, he can't. So I don't know. I don't have any inside info on that, unfortunately. Hopefully they'll both be back. And I think it will be interesting to see if Averill does return, like he doesn't retire and whatever, like he could be a guy they cut, to get some cap savings for.
Yeah.
So, but that's like a big question mark, whether he's even going to be healthy enough to play. So, I don't think. I guess the one guy to look at is Jeremy Lane. I think they'll probably cut him. They tried to get rid of him earlier, and not get rid of him, but he was part of that trade with the Sheldon with what's his face, their left tackle Dwayne Brown, and it fell through, obviously. But yeah, I don't think he's probably not in their long-term plans at this point. And so he could be the one thing. He's like the big one in terms of cap savings that I could see them use. But I don't think they have a ton of wiggle room. I mean, I just don't see them getting rid of Sherman at this point.
Right.
Yeah,
that's why I say they're pretty much set with what, for the most part, what they've got to go in with next year. In addition to that, at the moment, not having second and third round picks, it also hampers their ability to change much.
This is the most they've been hamstrung, in my opinion, since they got started, which is, it's a tough situation to be in because, they're arguably their worst year in a long time. So,
but their worst year is still 9-7, maybe
right. It's all relative.
It's like if, top 50, they were maybe the 14th or 12th best team in the NFL,
Remember, they did beat the Super Bowl champions on whatever, it was like Sunday night or Monday Night Football.
Yeah,
and
that was
like, so
Carson Wentz. That was their team.
Right. So it's not like they're bad, but it's just that they don't have, obviously they're just not set up for success as in the same way that they have been before in terms of cap space and 10 picks or whatever to work with. Like they are a little bit hamstrung relative to typical Seahawks fashion.
So let's talk a little bit, let's say that they just released Jeremy Lane and Cliff Averill, perksoverthecap.com, that puts them at $26 million in cap room. So using, that in mind, that they have $26 million in cap room, I think the biggest name that people, maybe for the most part, of the big names, the one that might hold on to, and I could be wrong, but I think Sheldon Richardson is the one that gets talked about the most because, they give up their second round pick. They want this acquisition of Sheldon Richardson because it's the defensive tackle position is one that they've been chasing for a long time in terms of a guy that's really highly impactful there. I guess, first of all, what did you think of Sheldon Richardson's season with the Seahawks?
It's I don't know. I always kind of feel like I'm on the fence about it because on one hand, I think he played well. He was a very, very good run defender. And as the year got on, as the year went on, he got better in terms of their system and their scheme, but he wasn't as big of an impact as I was hoping that he would be. I'll put it that way. I think he, when they first made the trade, I was like, wow, this is going to be insane. The Seahawks defensive line is going to be insane. And it didn't really materialize like that. So I would say overall, it was a little bit disappointing, to be honest. And I just don't know if like spending 13 or 14 million or whatever it's going to be to keep him per year is a smart investment when they've been really, really good run defense team for years with guys that they can get for significantly cheaper. So like the question to me is, does he provide enough upside as a pass rusher to warrant, that $14 million range? And I just don't think so. I'm kind of on the fence about it, but I just don't think so.
Yeah, it's interesting. The franchise tag could come in at $14.5 million if they went that route. And an extension, maybe a little less of a cap hit this year, but more guarantees down the line. So what about, so the next big name up would be Jimmy Graham, 3 years with the Seahawks. The years where he didn't have red zone effectiveness, but was nice in between the 20s. And then this year where he was the best red zone target in the NFL, but averaged like 8 yards per catch. What were your thoughts on Jimmy Graham, and what would you be willing to have him come back for?
I mean, I don't think well, first of all, you ask yourself, do you think he wants to come back in the first place?
No.
Yeah, I don't either.
Yeah, so for sure. That's the biggest issue.
I kind of feel like it's a little bit of a moot point because I don't think he's going to want to re-sign in Seattle. Number one, I think he and Russell Wilson have a good chemistry and all that, but I don't think Graham is necessarily, best utilized in the Pete Carroll offense, especially outside the red zone. Obviously in the red zone, he was dope, but he could probably be that on any offense, honestly. And so, any offense with a good quarterback, I'll put it that way. Like if I were him, I'd way rather go to another team that does some of the more spread out stuff and uses him as a receiver and all that. Like he's lining up. He does still line up, in line a lot with the Seahawks. Not maybe not as much as he did at the beginning of his tenure here, but he's still doing that. And so I don't know. If I'm him, I'm probably moving on. The other thing is like the fans don't really like him. It feels like it's like, why would you want to come back to Seattle? Like he's like a generational talent, one of the best players at his position all time, and the fans don't really like him. Yeah. I think it's just weird. So if I were him, I would be out of here.
Well,
frankly.
let me ask you this too, because when we talked, it's a theme that just ran through both the Sheldon Richardson and the Jimmy Graham talk so far. And I'm thinking about, like, I'm also thinking back to Percy Harvin, and it's like the Seahawks go out and they make these big moves to get huge superstars.
None of
and they
them
put
work.
them in their offense or their defense, and it seems like they don't know how to use them. Like, even when they had Percy Harvin and he was healthy at the start of the year, where they eventually traded him, it just seemed like, do they even know why did they get this guy if they didn't have him do things like that were to his abilities? So, what do you think there is an issue with Pete Carroll, or do you think that that's what they're trying to address with the coordinator changes?
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. That's an interesting question. It definitely seems true, though, that they've struggled to on offense, particularly, because I think that I mean, I do think that Richardson came in and like played his role well and did a good job. I don't think they misused him. I'll put it that way. But the Graham thing, the Percy Harvin thing, it definitely kind of raises questions on, like, what was the plan here exactly? Like, why did you make the trade to get Graham and then want him to line up in line in your weird, like, slow offense?
Right.
It just doesn't really make that much sense. And then the other thing that just been bugging me for like 3 years is they didn't figure out how to use him in the red zone until his third year. Like, why did that take so long? Well, explain to me why this took so long. I don't get it, because it's not difficult. Like, it's not complex. You line him up against a small guy and he's big. Like, that's it. I don't know. And then people talk about, oh, it took chemistry, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, whatever. I don't care. It's the most simple thing in the world. And he did it for years in New Orleans. It doesn't make any sense to me that you wouldn't do that immediately all the time and just force the chemistry to happen. I don't know. So, like, I don't know. The whole Jimmy Graham thing annoys me. I don't think he's going to be back. I don't think he wants to be back. I don't think they're going to spend more than $10 million on a guy. I will say the one argument that makes sense to me to bring him back is that he's essentially your goal line back. You know, he is. And you guys did a great article at Field Goals about it in terms of their just atrocious goal line running ability over the last few years. The Seahawks are terrible at running, you know, inside the 5-yard line or whatever. And so Graham is sort of an automatic, not automatic, but he's really, really good inside the 5-yard line. And that to me is a big value. So that would be the counter argument to me, being like, well, they misused him for years and he probably doesn't want to be back. But at the same time, him as a de facto goal line back that's a big thing, because they've been bad in the red zone, you know, basically since Russell Wilson came around. So I don't know, that it's another hard decision. I don't necessarily think it's going to be one the Seahawks end up making, though. I don't think he's going to want to come back.
So if they didn't do Sheldon Richardson or Jimmy Graham, that would still leave them with the $26 million in cap room that I mentioned earlier, and that would get us then to Paul Richardson. You know, and Paul Richardson's cap figure for his next contract, who knows? It could be anywhere from $5.5 million per year to $8.5 million per year. We'll really see from the market, you know, what ends up happening, because he's a guy that his first 3 years did nothing. He was injured, or when he was on the field, it wasn't doing much, and he had 599 yards in those first 3 seasons. And then last year looks like a pretty talented guy, the guy that you thought you were getting when you drafted him. And maybe that's the guy that he'll be for the next decade, but it's a little bit of a risk in that sense. But, you know, the Seahawks, will they be comfortable going with Tyler Lockett, you know, and he's got 1 year left on his deal, and Amara Darbo, or maybe going out and get someone else? And if you're in this situation, if you're losing Jimmy Graham,
the shelves are bare at the receiver position. Yeah.
So where do you stand with Paul Richardson?
I lean towards them keeping him. And like that's more maybe just because I don't have much faith in them, like, developing the Darbos, the Moores, the, you know, people that are the guys that are behind him right now. Like, definitely not Tanner McAvoy. I'm just like, you know, what are they going to do if Richardson leaves? It's going to be Baldwin and Lockett, and like you said, Lockett's into the last year of his deal or whatever, and then that's it. Really, they've got no-name guys that you'd have absolutely no idea if they're good or not yet. So, I mean, they know better, but right now, just from the outside looking in, there's not much depth there. So I would probably try and keep him. It just depends, though, like how much it's going to cost. Do you know kind of where people are projecting him to, like, how much money people are projecting him to get at this point, like in terms of like the first year cap hits and things like that? Because it obviously just depends on how much he's going to get on the open market.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, for what, John Gilbert wrote about it, I wrote about it a little bit, and I think that when you really start to parse it out and compare them to receivers of similar age when they hit free agency and similar production, I think it does come into that range of maybe $6 million or $7 million, and maybe in the first year, it stays in that 7-8 million, which puts them. My big thing there is if you're paying Paul Richardson $8 million and you're paying Doug Baldwin $10.5 million, you're basically the only team in the NFL that has two receivers making more than $8 million at this point. And the only ones that come close are like Julio Jones and Mohamed Sanu. And I can't really say that Baldwin Richardson is at the same level as Jones Sanu. And I don't know that. I think if you're paying Doug Baldwin to be a number one receiver, even if he's a slot receiver, you're paying him as a number one receiver. Your number two, I think he even has to have more potential than Paul Richardson. And maybe it's a little bit much to be putting in there, especially because you have invested a little bit in some of the younger guys to take over at some point. So that's sort of where I stand.
Yeah, it's tough. That's why I waffle between yes and no on that. I don't have a strong opinion on it because it's one of those like you laid out. I mean, it's just kind of tough. He didn't stand out enough, I think, to warrant enthusiastic. Yeah, we got to keep him.
Yeah.
But at the same time, he's definitely better than the guys behind him, and he showed some flashes of the guy he was at Colorado. The reason they were so high on him and they were willing to take him in the first round, they talked about when they drafted him. He was their first. I think he was early in the second or whatever, but
45th overall. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I don't know. There's flashes of it. And it's one of those things where is this the guy on the upswing and he's going to turn into a superstar because he makes superstar catches. But obviously there's questions about his health and everything. But I do think in terms of just with Russell Wilson, guys that can separate and things like that, guys that can get deep, he does seem like a good fit. And he seems to have good chemistry with Wilson. And so there's some factors like that. I think, I'll put it this way. I'm not going to be like disappointed if they do end up re-signing him, but at the same time, I'm not going to be devastated if he leaves. It's one of those things where you're a little bit agnostic about it. I just don't really care. But I do think that their depth gets pretty thin, if he doesn't come back. They'll have to figure something out. Maybe there's some lower level receivers they can get on the free agent market or whatever, but they just haven't been that. Seems like they haven't been really that great at drafting quarterbacks. So I don't really trust them to do much in the draft at this point, but you never know.
Let's rapid fire these other free agents, and you can sort of just give me since we haven't necessarily talked about all of them and their stint with the Seahawks, you can just sort of rapid fire your thoughts on their season and whether or not you'd like to see them return or not. Luke Jokel.
No. Is that enough? No.
I mean, briefly, did you, it's hard to get a gauge on any offensive lineman usually, but did you at least think he was like good or?
I think he was like serviceable. I don't think he's the kind of guy that you want to spend any significant amount of money to come back. I'll put it that way. I don't think he was at the level that takes, that would require that, like whatever he's going to make. Cause he got what, like 8 million guaranteed or something like this year. And that was after he was coming off like a major injury. So you'd have to assume he get a little bit more next year. I don't think that's worth it. I can't, that's obviously not for sure, but that would be my assumption. Like if you're going to get a little bit more, definitely no.
Eddie Lacy.
No, I was actually looking through. Oh man, I was looking through my old articles from last year at this time the other day, and I saw that I actually listed Eddie Lacy as the best running back available on the free agent market. Now, the free agent market was bad. Like there were no real good options, but looking back on that, I'm like, man, I really whiffed on that one.
Yeah.
He just was not good at all.
I thought it was a pretty good signing. So yeah.
Changed our tins. Luke Wilson, yeah, I would keep him. Assuming it's not going to be super expensive. I think, you go into next year with just Nick Vannett, at tight end. I think as long as Wilson, isn't going to be like he's not going to draw like a lot of interest on the open market. I think I would keep him just because he's super durable. He's athletic. He kind of, I don't know if he's like a great blocker, but he can block. He's at least he can block on the move. Um, I don't know. I like Wilson, so I would try and keep him.
Yeah, I don't imagine why he would get more than he did last year because he didn't improve his stock from anything that I saw. And it was 1 year, $1.5 million, and maybe with inflation, it's $2 million. And I don't know if I necessarily see him getting more. So, Bradley McDougald.
Yeah, I would keep him. Assuming again, it's assuming there's not a crazy bidding war, but I thought he played really well. Coming in and having to take over for a guy like Cam Chancellor, I think he acquitted himself pretty well, and I think he showed that he's a pretty versatile guy. And again, it's like another thing is that having safety depth is huge, I think, for this team, and so I would definitely be in favor of giving him like a 2 or 3 year deal or whatever.
Maybe he didn't play a ton of Michael Wilhoit.
I don't have any opinion. I don't care.
There's not much of an opinion there.
He could leave. That'd be fine. I don't know.
And this one's, I feel like, pretty straightforward. Deshaun Shed.
I don't know, actually. I think, I mean, it would be good.
Straightforward too. Just comes from the fact, like, well, what's he gonna get?
Is he officially a free agent now? Did they because there was like some question of like his RFA versus whatever claims.
I'm pretty sure it's he's already tweeted out that he's going to be a free agent.
Oh, okay, gotcha. No, I would. He's a tough one because I like, Shaquille Griffin proved I think he's a great prospect. He should be the starter. I would prefer, frankly, to go for Byron Maxwell over Shed. If you're going to spend the money, I would go for Maxwell.
Yeah, so
Maxwell's older, but I was never a huge Shed guy. Like I thought he played well enough, but I don't think he was necessarily, because you have to choose, you have to pick and choose who you're giving these second contracts to because the money goes quickly once you get into these contracts. And I thought that Maxwell played pretty well in coming in last year, and I would rather have them kind of stick with him.
So I'll do one more, which is what you thought of, Marcus Smith.
Marcus Smith, I thought he played all right. Trying to remember like what his stats were, but I think he was like relatively productive based on the amount of snaps he got. But again, it's one of those things where you have to be careful where you spend the money, and there's not a lot of it to go around. And so, if Smith is going to get any sort of significant deal elsewhere, I think you let him go. But if you can get him on like a really cheap veteran deal, then he showed some value, I think.
So it's like those are the guys that they could bring in, and I think or that they could retain. And I think we know that Pete Carroll instills a philosophy. I think that it's more important to keep your guys than to go out and get guys, though they will typically make like one big move every year at least. And if they don't, if they go down that line like we just went, if they had 26 million in cap and they didn't sign Graham, or they didn't sign Richardson, and they didn't sign Paul Richardson, or even maybe if they did, they'd still have enough room to make a big deal. And we'll see where they would go in that direction as well. Also, like, what did you think of the offense with Dwayne Brown at the end of the year? Did you notice anything significantly different? Do you see you have a different outlook on next season because Brown will be going into the year as the left tackle?
I love Brown. He didn't play like amazingly necessarily, but I think in Seahawks Twitter, there's been discussion ad nauseum about the style of blocking that they took and sort of the Tom Cable factor and all that. So I'll be really interested to see if Solari, how that all changes, and if the Seahawks offensive linemen play with a little bit more technically sound technique and all that. So, but overall, like, I love Brown. I think it's great that they have him. I think it could be a huge factor having a guy like that can pass block, who's a very solid, like, the rest of their offensive line is such a turnstile at all the time. It seems like it's hard to like really say that Brown, like make a big factor when everyone else is blowing their blocks. But just having that guy on the blind side to protect Wilson, I think could be huge. You're in a division with some good pass rushers on the outside. So yeah, I love Brown. I think that was, that's a huge bright spot in my mind in terms of this year. Obviously, some of the stuff was a lot disappointing, but the Brown thing, having him kind of on the roster. I hope they extend him. Because I mean, we need a guy on the edge like that. So I really like him.
So, and the other big question, of course, for everyone has been talk of the running back play behind the offensive line. And, Chris Carson coming back from injury, CJ Procise, we'll see whatever his status is. And then you've got restricted free agents, JD McKissick, Thomas Rawls, and Mike Davis. Thoughts on which of those running backs, especially the restricted free agents, that you think could get the best shot at maybe getting the number one carries next year?
I think, I'm guessing Carson will go back into the year sort of as the presumptive number one guy. I think Mike Davis played pretty well at times. At this point, I think Rawls probably gone. I think McKissick is like who they wanted Procise to be. I mean, I guess, right? And he looked pretty damn good. I really like McKissick, and obviously being able to stay on the field was important. So, it'd be great if Procise came back and kind of like made a shot, like took a shot at it and was a part of the rotation. But I would probably bank harder on McKissick being a bigger part of the offense. I think the way that they can use him as a receiver and flex him out, and he's actually a really good receiver. It's not like he's not a guy that can catch a ball. He's a good receiver. You know what I mean? And so, I like McKissick a lot. I think that they'll probably try and work him into the offense a lot more next year. But yeah, I would say Carson, Davis, McKissick for sure. And then Procise is sort of a wild card. Plus, I'm sure they'll draft a guy or two and bring in some undrafted guys and go from there. But yeah, that would be like my guess right now. Carson looked really good when he was healthy, and assuming he can get back to something like that, I think he has a lead back mentality and capability. I think Davis showed some good things. He also, I saw on field goals, he got stuffed a lot. So that's concerning. But yeah, I mean, you guys have done a great job of kind of breaking all this stuff down, honestly. So just credit to you guys. I really like the analytical way that you kind of approach everything. When you asked me to come on the show, I was like, well, I don't know as much about the Seahawks anymore as like all the field goals writers. So I don't know what I'm going to add, because I don't have the time to like break down like all the all 22 and stuff as much anymore. But so basically, what I'm trying to say is you guys do awesome work on all that. And yeah, that stuff rate thing was interesting. It'll be interesting to see if that, is that him just is that unlucky based on like the blocking? Is it actually him kind of picking the wrong lanes? Like that's something to watch going forward. Because he was a hit or miss or boomer bust or whatever kind of guy. So I don't know.
Oh yeah, credit to John Gilbert and Ben Baldwin and Mookie Alexander and just all the great, I'm just credit to those guys that they've been doing that work.
Lars and Alistair, there's a lot of like really I mean, it's like we were talking about this before the show. It's like there's only so many things you can talk about on one team throughout the whole year, and in blogging, you just have to attack it from so many different angles. And like, it seems like you talk about certain subjects ad nauseum, but that's because it's important. Anyways, like you guys did a kick-ass job at breaking down all the run game stuff. Cause that's obviously a huge, I mean, that's like it's like the biggest problem with the Seahawks by far is Pete Carroll wants to be a running team and they fucking suck at running. So what's going on?
So before we wrap, we'll talk briefly on the draft, and we can talk about the Seahawks. But before we do that, just kind of curious, because we did mention that the Browns have 6 picks in the top 65. It's maybe I think it is the most draft capital. I think I read that somewhere that a team has ever had. They pick number 1, they pick number 4, they pick number 33, they pick number 35, they pick number 64, and they pick number 65. So it's going to be a busy first 2 days, and a lot depends on if the Browns go and get Kirk Cousins, if they feel like they've locked in a quarterback, maybe that allows them to not draft a quarterback in the top 4. But do you think that, especially in this draft where we'll see what happens after the combine and where the stock is for these guys, but when you've got Josh Rosen and Josh Allen and Baker Mayfield and think I'm missing one. Who am I missing?
Well, Lamar Jackson's in there, and then Sam Darnold. Did you say Darnold?
Sam Darnold.
Yeah.
Yeah, Darnold was the other one that I think, Lamar Jackson has not quite cracked that top
Yeah.
10 territory for a lot of people. So,
Yeah.
but especially there for the Browns at number one. Do you think that, there's talk about just sign a guy and draft a guy, even if it's Cousins?
Mm-hmm.
Do you see that being a strategy that could be employed or one that you would employ?
Yeah, I think they should. And in theory, it makes a lot of sense for them to go that route because, they've got cap room and a fuck ton of draft picks. It's ridiculous. So you list them off, but to be a little bit like, in other words, they have the first and the fourth pick. They've got two out of the first three picks in the second round, and then they have the last pick in the third, last pick in the second, and the first and the third. So they've got ridiculous amount of ammo. So you have to use one of those, I think, on one of the top quarterbacks. They've been looking for a quarterback for decades. Just pull the trigger. I don't know who is the best at this point. I still have a lot of, sort of study to do, obviously. And there's, no one really agrees on who the best quarterback is at this point. But they got to pull a trigger on one of those guys, whether it's at number 1 or number 4. I don't know. But
remember, they didn't pull the trigger on Carson Wentz. They didn't pull the trigger on Deshaun Watson. Like, they've had opportunities.
And Mahomes, yeah. So, I mean, it's like at some point you got to just embrace that none of these guys are going to be perfect. You got to pull the trigger. Kaiser, I don't know. Obviously he didn't have a good year. He was awful. But on the other side of the coin, I think I have very little faith in the coaching staff of the Browns. We've talked about it a lot. Like, you have to really try to go 0-16. This was a talent. This team had more talent than an 0-16 team.
I mean, they were the best. They might have been the best run defense in the NFL. It's crazy. Like I was looking at their roster today, and it's like they've got Myles Garrett, obviously, but they have another first-round pick on their defensive line. They have 2 second-round picks, and they have 2 third-round picks, and they were all drafted within the last 3 years. And the defensive line is, arguably one of the most important units, if not the most important unit outside of quarterback in the NFL. And they might have the best next year. I mean, they could use another pass rusher. They need more pass rushing help.
Imagine if they get like Bradley Chubb or whatever, and they line him up opposite of
Myles Garrett. I mean, Garrett could be the best defensive end in the NFL, and it's like they could be there right now. And that would they've got talent in their secondary. They've got Jamie Collins at linebacker. It's like if they hit this draft right, they could be right into the thick of it. And it's hard to say. I still think that their best case scenario is like 8-8 because they're just starting from such a low place, and but they've also got an offensive line that theoretically should work. So it's like
they've spent a lot of money on that line, and it's actually a good line. So
and I could definitely see the Browns also trading down from 1 if they felt like they could get a quarterback at 4, or if they had drafted 1. I mean, if they had signed 1, they could use their draft position right now in a way of like, hey, if you're the Broncos and you're at 5 and you want Josh Allen or you want Josh Rosen, you want Sam Darnold, and it's almost certain that they're going to go in the top 3, you could use that to move down to 5 or 6 with the Jets, and certainly start to maybe talk about those moves. There's talk about the Bills, who have 2 picks in the first round at 21 and 22, even though that's a far drop down, the Browns have a lot of leverage right now because they're at 1 and 4, and the Browns have clearly demonstrated a need to have 2 first-round picks every single year. So it's like they could move down and pick up another first-round pick in 2019. It's like the cycle can continue in that way.
Yeah.
But even then, all of the moves down to acquire future first-round picks has only made them ever worse. So it's like they still have to get the guy. They still have to eventually get the guy that makes them not worry about who they hit in the first round because they're good. And so like there would be that opportunity there, and they've done good things, especially last year with Myles Garrett, even though it was like kind of felt like a slam dunk pick. There's opportunities here, and it's interesting because you talk about bad predictions with Eddie Lacy and stuff, and I feel like last year I pitched an article multiple times of like, oh yeah, I want to write about the Browns and how they're going to be interesting and fun to watch next year, and then they go 0-16.
Think about this though, like I feel like we talked about the Jags a lot in the same, not in the same vein as the Browns necessarily,
Yeah.
because the Browns are the Browns, but like we talked about them for a while in the sense that like, oh, they got some really interesting guys. You know, they're very, very talented. They've made some interesting picks. They've made some interesting signings in free agency. Now, I will say the Browns haven't made the same kind of signings in free agency as the Jags did over, the last couple of years. But I remember going into this last season thinking like, I'm not going to say anything good about the Jaguars because they've made me look bad the last like 2 years when I keep saying, oh, they're going to be interesting and fun. But I mean, your fortunes can turn pretty quick, and obviously this amount of picks and new GM leadership there, maybe that could make it a factor. Who knows? But I mean, this could be a team that makes a jump. We'll put it that way. And I hope they do because it would just be more fun. I don't really. There's really no benefit to me of the Browns being the Browns anymore. It's like we've seen that movie like 30 times. Like, just be more fun if it was different.
So we'll end on the Seahawks, who are at pick 18, their highest draft pick since drafting Bruce Irvin in 2012 when they were originally at 12th and they moved down to 15th in that draft. At pick 18, it'll be their highest opportunity to take a player, but we also know that
they won't use
starting with that draft in Bruce Irvin in 2012, they've traded down or out of the first round in every single season since. And without day 2 picks, it makes them more likely to try and acquire additional picks. So
they'll trade down at least once. Yeah, for sure.
So yeah, it's outside of that. Do you have any feeling in terms of the draft need that they would want to address first or second?
Yeah. Yeah, because it's obviously there's the question of the need, the team needs. There's some gray area there, but then also there's a question of like how much do you want to spend? Like what positions do you spend a first round pick on? That's a whole nother thing, because obviously I think they should draft a running back at some point, but I think they probably wait until like the second or third round. I think they should draft a receiver and they'll probably wait until the second or third round. But this is again assuming that they have picks in those rounds. And so I'm definitely assuming they trade back at least once, maybe twice. And I don't know, I guess they probably choose like a defensive end or something like that. Like Bennett's getting older. Frank Clark is not necessarily a for sure thing going forward in terms of, his contract's coming up at some point. Avrill's kind of done at this point, probably. So I would guess they choose some pass rusher, or what other positions would be like a late, like a offensive lineman, potentially late first round, early second round kind of position for them. I think that their linebacker core is really, really shallow. So I could see them getting like a very highly athletic linebacker that maybe falls to them there. Going on one of those kind of positions, I don't think they'll probably take a corner that early, but if a guy that they really like falls into the second round, maybe they spend a second on that. But I would probably lean towards pass rush, linebacker, or offensive line and go from there. But I don't know if that's necessarily their top 3 needs, but I think those are needs that fit early round sort of area.
Well, and it's a long ways away. We got a lot of steps to get through between now and the draft, including first the combine and the further evaluation of the picks, and second of all, of course, the free agency and the needs that'll be had after teams, new players. And the Seahawks, as we've said before, may not have that much wiggle room this year and may stay somewhat the same, though they are almost certain to lose one or two or all 3 of their big name free agents, perhaps. So we'll see what happens in that area and continue to sort of track how it affects the Seahawks and also, the rest of the NFL. And we'll see how things stack up with these quarterbacks that'll be changing teams, whether it's in the NFC or the AFC and so on and so forth. So, Danny, I appreciate you coming on and taking up quite a bit of time here to do the show. Where would you want people to follow you and track your work?
Well, you can find me at theringer.com, just kind of getting into the draft now in terms of our coverage. So that's kind of my focus. Obviously, the draft and free agency and so all that. And so going to the combine here in about a week and a half. But yeah, you can find me on the Ringer and then at my Twitter handle at Danny B. Kelly.
I think that's at Danny B. Kelly. I don't know if it was just me or if it's on the actual broadcast, but yeah, you
Oh,
cut
did I
out
cut out
there
there?
in the
Okay.
middle of it.
I said
But
it.
I just want to make sure that people hear it.
Yeah, I said it for sure. I don't know if
Um,
it caught it or not, but yeah.
And speaking of the draft and things, as I said before, here we got 3,000 NFL mock draft, Seaside chats, Seahawks chats, all that stuff that I'm doing here with podcast wise. If you want to support it and help it keep going, you can go to patreon.com/goals, $1 or $2 or anything that you want to feel like you contribute to the show. Please feel free to do so. And if you want to continue listening for free, that's perfectly understandable as well. I'm Kenneth Arthur. You can find me on Twitter at Kenneth Arthur S, or the Field Goals at Field Goals, fieldgoals.com. For a lot of great writers besides me, for different breakdowns and stuff about the Seahawks, cap situations and things that are coming up here in free agency. And if you want to subscribe to the show, go to Seaside Chats and subscribe on iTunes to the show for all the feeds of all the shows. And I'll try and update that show picture and theme song and do things that show that there's been changes.
I wasn't meaning to say that you should do
No,
that.
no. That's it for this week on what was the old outro for Real on the Field Goals?
Oh man, no, I can't even remember.
I think it was something like keep it real in the field
Oh yeah.
goals.